nice to have you. If you're visiting, thank you for being here. And there are several visitors. Karen, nice to have your parents here. Marilyn, your granddaughter. Caleb, nice to see you today. Doug, y'all remember I told y'all about a poet from a man from Vietnam had written some poems. Doug, nice to have you today. Great work, great poems. How about the stripes? Pam and Ashley and I got the memo. We were supposed to wear stripes. I don't know who got the leopard memo out. There's like 100 of you ladies wearing leopards today. Is it a Labor Day thing? Leopard clothing? Nice to see you today. Nice to have you. Is that Robert? Can't see. It's dark out there. Nice to have you. Thank you guys very much. How about Samaritan's Purse? Anything need to be said about that yet?
It's coming out soon.
I just saw all the boxes in the deal.
We were prepping for it. We're bringing them in slowly so that we're prepared for everybody's.
Don't give us a break. Don't give us a break. We go from Christmas in July. Thank you for $5,700 that you raised for the orphanage in New Mexico. And then we helped $2,400 a couple of weeks ago with the cancer treatment. And now let's just start giving for the shoebox for Christmas stuff. Let's get it going. This year, by the way, Jackie is our missions director and does an awesome job taking care of these things each year. And this year, is it confirmed? Is our church going to be the drop-off point? The other, don't clap over that. We need volunteers. We don't need applause. We don't need any clapping, Jackie. Look at everybody that clapped, Jackie. Write their names down quick. The other church that was the drop-off point, I think lost an employee or two. They're not able to do it this year, whatever reason. And so Jackie stepped up to the plate. So our church will be where all the boxes start getting dropped off. I don't know what will happen in the fellowship hall as they start coming in before they're delivered, but that's all right. That's between Jackie and those of you that applauded. Give her your name today before you leave. God bless all of you. Really nice to see you. Those that are gone on Labor Day, I'm glad you had money to leave and that you had people wanted to see you. So good. Some of you have already been on trip. I thought the Genies weren't going to come back. They took a nice long trip and sent awesome photos of where they were, and I thought, well, they're not coming back. You send pictures like that, you're just going to stay forever. Those are beautiful shots. God bless all of you today. Today we're going to talk about 4 Ations. I know you thought we left a letter out, but we didn't. That's the title of today's sermon. My apologies. I know it's lame and sometimes just a little obnoxious that anybody can be quite as lame as I can be without trying. But I do want to talk to you about 4 Ations today. Now just hang on with me for just a moment and I'll explain it very quickly. It's what I think is a repetitive pattern in life. Just trying to think of a way to make your memory glands kick in if those things are attached to glands and make you remember a little bit better. I'm going to talk to you today about desperation. That's one of the Ations. Inspiration. Perspiration, and you're already saying, oh my word, is that it? Is that what it was? Yes. And then the final one is coronation. The truth is, in these 4 simple words, I see a pattern that's repeated so often in life. It is worth stopping and paying attention to for just a moment. You can start in the Old Testament and realize that this is the repeated pattern of Israel. Every time she got in trouble, she became desperate because she was either in bondage or felt like she was under the curse of God. God had just turned his back on her. They reached the bottom. They ran out of food. They ran out of necessities. They were at war. They were conquered. It doesn't matter. The story is repeated so often in the history of Israel in the Old Testament that they would get desperate finally for a change of life. Whatever was going wrong, they needed a change. And at some point in their desperation, somebody would give them a reason to be inspired. It could be a prophet with a word from God, a reversal possible. If you do this, something can happen. But somewhere they would get the idea that we can do this, we can get better, we can get out of this hole. And once the inspiration was there, then they would do something about it. They'd sweat. They'd work. They wouldn't just whine and cry anymore. They would literally get up and go. They would march around the city. They would light the torches. They would blow the trumpets. They would do whatever God might have through a prophet told them to do. And once they started that process, they moved from being desperate to being inspired to putting some legs to their hope and ambition, and then would come the crowning victory. It's similar to the life story. I mean, literally and truly, if you look at believers in Christ, we do the same thing. We're desperate to enjoy life, to have that, where's the life abundant? Didn't Jesus say, I'm come that you might have life and you might have it more abundantly? And if you take a survey in the average Christian's home, you'd say, are you living the abundant life? Well, not yet. And sometimes we would just downright cry and say, no, my life is far from abundant. I've had, and you can just list your problems. I used to years ago, I had a few standard questions I would ask somebody when they came in for a meeting, and some of them would center on, what do you think's the worst thing that has happened to you in the last month or the last year? And I never got a thing. I always got a dozen of things. And if I turned right around and said, so what do you hope will be the best thing you can be telling about a month from now? I don't know. I'll win the lottery? That's not realistic. Realistically, what do you think will be the best thing? I don't know, because they hadn't had inspiration yet. They're still dwelling on the past and all the blunders and all the mistakes. But I'm telling you, it's a cycle you've repeated probably in your life. It's one you're going to keep repeating in your life. Life is never flawless and perfect. To all of us, there will come those intermittent fires. I use that phrase just going back to the picture in Revelation that John created when he said he saw a sea of glass mingled with fire. And when I read that phrase, I think that's a good description of life. For the most part, my life is smooth sailing. But man, once in a while, it's mingled with fire. I sail right from a smooth sea into a fire. And I don't know how long it's going to last. I don't know how deep that fire goes. I don't know if it's going to be a day, a month, or a year. But after a while, when you sail through a few fires, it's easier to get inspired when the next one comes. Like I've quoted so often from a Steve Jobs commencement speech, when you look backwards, all the dots connect. You'd never have chosen to go there, to be in that mess. You wouldn't have chosen to be an alcoholic. You wouldn't have chosen to be, we say, well, you did. No, it's not always what you choose to do. Sometimes it's what happens to you. One of the reasons I love the made-up stories, we call them parables. But every parable in the New Testament is a story Jesus literally made up to try to illustrate and teach a point. And those parables give us a great glimpse of life. And I'll give you an example. One of them is the prodigal son. He chose to leave his father and go off. And he reaped what he sowed and wanted to come back to his father. But hey, same Jesus telling made-up stories told us about a coin that was lost in the house. And he doesn't care about coins. That coin represented a person. He was talking about us and our souls. And he told about a woman who had a coin, but she lost it in the house, and she couldn't find it. So she swept diligently trying to find it. Finally, she got her neighbors to come over. And when they found it, they rejoiced. And so do the angels of heaven rejoice when one soul got. That's the story. And I ask you, was it the coin's fault that it got lost? Did he willfully get up and roll himself off the counter? Now, I've had a few bills I think did that. At least that's what I told my wife. I don't know where that 100 went. Did you play golf this week? Well, I might have played golf. So, money just disappears sometimes of its own accord. Well, it doesn't. That's the point of that parable from Jesus. It is possible sometimes that we're lost not because of our mistakes, but because of what somebody else did to us. You're wounded and you're hurt. Wounded in the house of friends sometimes. You're blackballed and don't know why. You are banished and you don't know why you got kicked out of the club. You just don't know why people are talking about you. So it's not always your fault, and there's no point in dwelling on fault. The point of this whole message today is going to tell you that if you live long enough, you'll look back at the dots and realize how many times this cycle has repeated itself. In my desperation, I just needed to be inspired for some reason. I needed some hope. God, is it possible? The longer you live, the more you go through this cycle. I just look back and say, you know, you never left me alone before. You're not going to leave me alone this time. If you've read the works of David, the life of David, and the Psalms of David, you know that David's life was far from perfect. He was in and out of trouble all of his life. His sons turned against him at one time. The king that he sang and played good music for turned against him and wanted to kill him. David would hide in the caves now and then. But after a while, David just, reading his Psalms, you realize David just came to know, well, I'm going through another valley, but I'm just going to look to the hills from which comes my help, because he knew help would come sooner or later. And most of you, some of you here have lived long enough to know, if you're going through some fiery spots today, hang on. It won't be long. Sooner or later, you're going to actually get through it. Help's going to come. God's going to get you there. And you know, you just find this pattern going on. I'm inspired to believe God's going to help me. I'm looking for a way out. And tomorrow I may see something that'll inspire me and believe. I believe God's going to do it. And I'll get up and apply myself, and I'll work hard toward that goal, and then it's going to happen. Paul even wrapped up the whole story of life that way. Look at the Apostle Paul's life. It was rocky and rugged, beaten and stoned, not because he did anything wrong, because he's doing the work of God. Left for dead, doing the work of God. Shipwrecked, trying to do the things he thought God wanted him to do. And then Paul would say, you know, I've finished my course. I've run my race. There is laid up for me a crown. Coronation day's coming. I'm going to be crowned finally. I'm going to finally make my last cycle of calling out to God, believing he'll help me, putting my legs into action, doing the best I can. That verse that came up at the end of that little Labor Day video a while ago, a great appropriate verse. Whatever I do today, I want to do it to the best of my ability, Ecclesiastes. And then back to New Testament Colossians, because I want to do it as if I'm doing it for God. Well, that is who you're doing it for. And so here's this cycle. I was looking this week. I just got on a trend this week, thinking about today and asking the Lord for a little direction. And I started just looking for stories of people. I only got one on the screen today, but I started looking for stories of people whose lives would reflect this. They reached the point of desperation, and then they were inspired to believe they could change, and then they got up and did something about it, and lo and behold, they changed. Here came God, victory, success, whatever. It's so easy to find. I wanted to make sure that it wasn't somebody who didn't have who just kind of ruined their life. You know how some of us do. Some of us make more mistakes than we ever want anybody to know, and we'll never tell them. But that's my story. That's me. I seem to have a habit of making bad choices a lot along the way, whether in business or in life in general. You know, I'm not the brightest bulb in the room, and I'm by no means the genius in anything. I'm the expert from out of town. They paid me to fly around the United States and teach other people how to do. Because I had failed enough times, I should have known how to do. But I didn't tell anybody that. Oh yeah, I failed in that one, I failed in that one. I had LLC for those 3 jobs. Yeah, those didn't really pan out long. But you know, I learned something. So I actually got paid 22 years ago to fly around the United States and teach other people how to do what I had not done very well myself. But I felt really smart because I thought I struggled, I was desperate, I asked for a way out, I believed God would help me, I got up and interviewed, I got the job, I'm making big bucks as a failure and loser to tell other people how to win. You can't beat that. But that's the story of some of your lives probably too. It's just not bad. So I got to looking at some of these stories. I'm just going to mention a couple of things real quickly. You might have seen the Afghanistan veteran, the fellow that came back from the army in Afghanistan, quadriplegic. He was a minesweeper and literally was sweeping the area, turned around and laid his tool down behind him, and somehow he had missed a mine right there, and the mine blew off and took a leg and an arm. But before all the surgeries were finished, they would have to take the other leg and the other arm. A husband, a father, and he woke up in a hospital realizing that he was a quadriplegic. And you can find his story on Rise by GoCast. And what an unbelievable great story. If I didn't have to preach a sermon and take a lot of your time, I would have just played 20 minutes of his video, because this is this guy's story. He woke up in Walter Reed Hospital in despair when he realized he will never walk again and never do anything again. But somebody came in with 4 prosthetic limbs into the hospital room. And by the time they were through, he was inspired. And all he needed was the inspiration to believe that he could overcome that. And his story fit these 4 steps, these 4 Ations. His story fit these 4 steps to a T. Look it up sometime. I can't remember his name. Just Google quadriplegic veteran Rise by GoCast. There was a young man, Scott may remember, a man in the Port Arthur church who got his leg caught at the steel mill. And Jim was a supervisor, and he was working at the big steel mill there in Beaumont, and he should have known better. A big piece of steel got caught between rollers, and there was an emergency stop that was supposed to be hit. When they did, he yelled at the other guy who had gotten it stuck to hit the switch. He thought the guy had hit the switch, and he stepped down to dislodge that piece of metal with his foot, but the switch had not been cut off, and it caught his ankle and his leg and rolled it between rollers that were meant to bend heavy steel. And of course, it snapped his leg completely and crushed it completely. And there was nothing to do but amputate. And they amputated, I believe, right below the knee, his leg. And it was a devastating blow. And when we got the phone call at the church, I was an assistant pastor there. And when we got the phone call at the church, his wife was crying on the phone. And she said, I just left the room and he is so depressed. It's unbelievable. It's just horrible. He doesn't know what he's going to do. He's never going to be able to make a living again, and he's so distraught over it. And so the pastor went up to see him and came back and called me, and he said he's mentally he's in bad shape. Physically he's going to be all right. They cut the leg off, but he's mentally gone. It'll just take time. And I said, you're not going to believe this, but last week, I probably sneaked off of work one day to go play golf. I don't remember if I sneaked off, but I know I didn't ask permission. So I'm just going to say it was my golf day. He's passed away. He won't be able to call me and chide me now. I went to play golf in Beaumont. As fate would have it, the choir director and I were fixing to tee off, and here comes a man walking we don't know. And he said, hey, the pro said I could join y'all if y'all didn't mind. You mind? I said, no. So we took a third player on, and we play about 5 holes. He's not bad. He's pretty good. He's keeping up. We're keeping up. About 5 or 6 holes later, he actually starts playing better. And then he wins a couple of holes. And I said to him, I said, man, you were sandbagging for a few holes, and now you're coming on. I don't remember if we were playing for $1 or not. I would never admit it back then to anybody. I'm just going to tell you, he started beating us for whatever it was worth. And I said, man, you were sandbagging. You're doing really good. And he said, yeah, not bad for one leg, huh? And I said, yeah, right. And he sat down because his leg had come loose, and he had to adjust it and pull it back up. And I saw underneath his pants, he really had one leg. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. He said, what? And I said, pull that up. And he pulled his pants up, and I said, you really have one leg? He said, yeah. And I said, what a cheap, sleazy thing to do. And he said, I kid you not, he said, what? And I said, wait until you start beating us, and then brag. I only got one leg, and I'm beating you guys. That is the lowest form of golf. Golf is a game of gentlemen. Keep your leg hidden until we're through. And he found that to be so funny. He literally grabbed me, like hugged me. He said, that is the best thing anybody's ever said to me. And I said, well, I'm not trying to be funny. Cover your leg up and don't tell us anymore and remind us you got one leg. And I told the pastor, I said, you're not going to believe this. Last week, accidentally, I met a one-legged man who lost his leg in a motorcycle accident. He beat me and Wayne at golf. I called that man. I said, a good friend of mine last week lost his leg up at the steel plant in Beaumont. Any chance I can get you to go visit him? He said, is there any chance? Where can we meet? I met him outside the hospital. We walked in the room, and we walked in, and the guy's laying there. I already heard from his wife. He's still in deep depression. I didn't know how my friend was going to introduce himself. I just walked in, my new friend. I just walked in, and I said, hey, Jim, I brought somebody to meet you. I turned around, and he's pulling his pants up and popping his leg off. Pulled up his pant and everywhere, pops his leg off, hands his leg, shoe, and sock up to Jim in the bed and said, hi, my name is whatever, and here's my leg. And just laid it there. And Jim said, what? And so the guy starts laughing, and then he tells him the golf story. He said, yeah, your pastor buddy here, he humiliated me last week because I acknowledged that I was beating him with one leg. And Jim brightened up and said, you really beat him? He said, yeah, I beat him with one leg. And so they got into a long discussion. It was a turning point for him. His wife would call me a couple of days later and say, you're not going to believe. That I left him. I wasn't going to sit there and listen to more bragging about a one-legged man beating me. I walked out and left those two guys alone. And in that moment, Jim got inspiration and decided to start exercising that leg and working so that when they finally built a prosthetic for him, he would have strength enough in his muscles to get going because he believed he could and believed God would help him. And he did. And just that cycle, you get desperate. Finally, you start believing it could happen. You put yourself into it and believe and work, and then it happens. And so in all the stories I read, you might have heard about the lady who was homeless, and at 15 years old, she was homeless, literally sleeping on subways. Great story. She's been on a number of interview programs, finally decided the only way to improve her life from her mother and dad who had been drug addicts, and her dad was in jail wherever he was. Her mom, I think, had died from a drug overdose. And she finally decided she tried to get admitted to colleges. She was going to get her GED. She couldn't get anybody to take her seriously. And finally, one day, just something happened. She heard something, saw something, and she said in her own story, I knew that if my life was ever going to get better, it would require me to do something about it, and I could. And you might Google her story today and just Google 15-year-old girl who got accepted to Harvard and finished 4 years of Harvard in 2 years. And has an awesome story. And when you read her story, if you do, fit it in these 4 Ations. Desperation was there, homeless at 15, sleeping in subways in New York. Just read it knowing she got inspired one day, and then she sweated. She pounded door to door, found where colleges were, went in, asked them, what does it take to get enrolled? What do I have to do to get approved? What do I need? And I would get what I need. And she just applied herself until finally the crowning day came. And then one that I will share with you quickly today was the story of this lady. Some of you might have seen her, probably more so than others. This is Katie Piper. The picture on the left is when she was like 24 years old. She was already on a TV show. She got to sell things on a TV show. She got to do little spots on it, promos on it, and they just loved her. And she might have actually been anchoring her own little sales show on TV at that time. And then in 2008, she started dating some loser. And she decided after a couple of dates, he met him online. He approached her. He had been following her career and idolizing her from afar. And she went on a date with him. And 2 or 3 dates later, she realized this is not the kind of person I want to be dating. And then he raped her. And she tried to stay away from him. completely and wouldn't answer his calls and ran every time she saw him coming anywhere. And he literally paid another punk and good for nothing to throw a bottle of acid in her face on the city street, and forever took away her beauty. This is a good photo of her on the other side. This is long after a few hundred surgeries. So far to this time, over 400 surgeries trying to rebuild her face. They experimented on her and did things that have never been done for burn victims before. And it's one reason she has started her own Katie Piper Foundation for burn victims, because they learned on her ways to graft other things on your face as well as skin from her own back. They literally had to replace all the skin on her face with an artificial substance and skin that they harvested from her own back. And if you Google her story ever, you will see how she looked in the early days right after the acid. She was in the hospital for 30 weeks. I don't remember how long she was in intensive care, but she was in the hospital for almost a year before she could even come out and go home. Couldn't talk, blinded in one eye, all from an insecure, jealous, insane boyfriend. Not even a boyfriend, a date for a few times. And so people were horribly cruel to her. Nobody knew the story in 2009. They just saw a horribly disfigured face, had to wear a plastic cover over her face much in order to help the process of healing of the skin underneath there. Didn't know if she'd ever get her voice back. And in the middle of all of that anxiety, a 25-year-old girl saw no hope. She would say she reached the bottom of life, period, and wondered if there was even any point to living. At some point over the next couple of years, she turned to anything that would relieve pain other than the medication they had given her constantly. She turned to alcohol, and she began to realize that she would sleep better with alcohol and could forget most things if she kept drinking. And of course, the mixing of medicine and alcohol wasn't good. But she didn't care because she had nothing to live for. And so this is a good example of not through her choices, wasn't her blunder. She didn't do anything wrong. She was living life and thinking she probably was the most successful 24-year-old girl around, and might have been. And then just through one insane freak show, her life turned upside down, and in her mind, forever and permanently. And so what was the point to going on? And so she turned to alcohol, and then at some point, and you have to really hunt for this, I had a minister friend tell me that her story is just not told online right, and so I kept hunting and digging and backtracing and finally found, aha, yes, I found where she started going to church. And in church, she started feeling accepted and loved from people. And nobody stared at her meanly or fearfully or looked away. Nobody would look and look away. In church, she started finding comfort, the way church is supposed to be. It's what you hear us say around here now and then. You're not here because, well, we're just us four and no more. We finally found the good people to just mix and mingle with. No. I'm horrible, and I'm probably the best among you. You're ne'er-do-wells. Paul said, he named a bunch of stuff. You liars and cheaters and whoremongers and fornicators and adulterers and backstabbers, and such were some of you. And that's who you are. And we remind ourselves of that now and then. We ought to be like AA a little bit more in Christianity. We ought to stop saying, no, sir, I'm clean as a whistle. We ought to start saying, I'm an alcoholic. I'm a drug addict. I've been clean and sober for 12 years. Let me tell you how I got clean and sober. But I'm still that. I'm a liar. I'm a cheater. But by the grace of God, I overcame it. I've been saved and sanctified and set free and set apart. And that's the way we ought to look at everybody. No judgment, no condemnation. It doesn't matter what we know about what you were. It only matters that we see what you are and what you're becoming. Man, there's nobody in here stands on his own 2 feet. We're propped up by the grace of God, every single one of us. And most of us pray that you never find out all the blunders we've made. We'll only confess the ones we don't mind you knowing. But I say that confidently and proud to know that I'm surrounded by a bunch of sinners just as I am. And we don't applaud each other for the sins we've been through. We applaud each other because we were inspired one day to believe God can save a wretch like me, but He requires me to get up and do something. And I got up and I did something. The great myth of grace is that we're saved by grace and grace alone. There's no scripture that actually says it that way. It says, by grace are you saved through faith. You got to believe. And then when you believe, you got to believe again. He that cometh to God must believe that He is, that He exists. That's not the end of the sentence. And that He is a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. I seek you today, God. I've been seeking you ever since I went to Vietnam. I don't know that I sought you much before then, but man, did that change things. And I never want to stop being a seeker of God because I know He holds the answer to all things. And He just waits sometimes till I put forth the effort to seek Him. In my desperation, I need a little inspiration. And she found her inspiration when she started attending a church and her family. I found a couple of pictures of the church and her there, and they finally let her tell her testimony, and there's a couple of TV stations that actually recorded it, and they've clipped it out, so I've been told, because it just doesn't fit the narrative they're trying to tell. They got an agenda they wanted to reach, and that was anti-this, anti-that, and so we just want enough of your story to do this. But she did get to do a Mother's Day event one time with her mother in which she was grateful to her mother for all of her love and support and grateful to the God who pulled her out of the depths and made her believe that she could get up and work again. And so she did, and I cut the story short. She got married, thinking that nobody would ever look at her and want to marry her ever. And a man came along who she says, he never even looks at my scars, he just looks at my eyes. That's God. I don't know about you. She wasn't talking about God, she's talking about her husband-to-be, but that's the way God is with me. I will once in a while, still to this day, I'll stop to pray and I'll say, God, forgive me for, and I'll start to say something in my past and I get the hint that God's saying sometimes, what? What? Because He's one promise. I will put your sins as far as the east is from the west. I'll bury them in the sea of forgetfulness. He doesn't need to be reminded of all your failures. He just looks in your eyes or in your heart. He just sees the heart. That's why David could confidently say, the plan of salvation God has for us, even God doesn't want it. That's what David said when he said, you don't want the blood of bulls and goats. Well, David, that's the salvation. You got to shed the blood of a bull or a goat to be saved in Israel. And David, living under Moses' law, said, you don't want the blood of bulls and goats. You want the broken and contrite spirit of a man given to you. And when you know that, and when you see that, and you come to understand that's what God wants for you, you ought to be inspired to know, I don't have to jump through hoops and kill a lamb and offer it to a sacrifice. I don't have to do anything except bring my heart to God and say, I'm sorry for my past. I want to believe you can help my future, and He will. And the day will come that you will have your own victory as she did. Quick story from the Old Testament. I just want to share it with you before we quit. The lepers. Man, I'm sorry for this ridiculous play on 4 lepers, and I brought you the 4 Ations today. I know. I'm just trying to leave a memory mark in your brain now and then. So it's just ironic that there were 4 lepers. I'm just going to name them. There was desperation. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. In 2 Kings, the 7th chapter, verse 3, there were 4 leprous men at the entering in of the gate. That's where lepers had to go. They couldn't just mix and mingle with people. In that day, in that hour, a leper could not mix and mingle in the common public places. They had to announce if they had to pass through town or a marketplace and anyone was coming close, a leper literally had to call out and announce, "Unclean." Can you imagine that? Unclean, so that people would move over and let him pass without having to touch the leper. I just can't imagine. We used to take winter ski trips with the family before one of my family members brought in children that couldn't ski, and we couldn't go anymore. We're waiting until they turn 18 and maybe can ski, and then we'll go back again. But I used to chuckle when I'd be skiing down slopes on the places we go, because anytime you're skiing too fast and there are slow people in front of you, if you're a skier, you know you're supposed to call out, "Skier left." I want them to know I'm coming up. Don't just zigzag over here in front of me. We're going to have a collision. So if I'm zooming down a hill and there's slow ones up there, you call out, "Skier left." So they'll just say, okay, and they'll wave and you go by and you just say, "Speed up," and you keep going. "Skier right," wherever you are. And I've chuckled a few times thinking, that must be how lepers used to do. "Unclean, unclean coming." Unclean? I have to be announced to society for all my wouldn't that be terrible if we had to do that today? "Liar. Liar coming through. Adulterer. Cheater. Coming through. Cheater. Got a job application for a cheater?" I don't think so. Try next door. But we don't have to do that, do we? We don't have to come to God and say, "Drug addict, drunk, liar, cheater." We don't have to do that. But we do because we're desperate. And in our desperation, we kind of do like these 4 lepers did. They were starving. Now, the backstory is easy for you to find. If you want to go find it, the backstory is very, very easy. Samaria was under besiege by King Ben-Hadad, king of Syria. They had surrounded Samaria. They had cut off all their supplies. No food could come in. No trash could get out. I mean, they literally had these people besieged so that finally it was taking its toll and the city was starving. The king was walking up on the precipice of the wall one evening and just trying to ponder, what do I do? I'm king. People are wanting me to do something. I don't know what to do. The army is huge. They've got us cut off. I don't know what to do. And while he's walking, he hears 2 women arguing down below, down by the wall, down below. They don't know he's up there. And he hears them arguing. And he stops to listen. And one of them said, you convinced me to boil my son and eat him last night, and we fed my son to the family, and now you refuse to do. You said you'd do yours tonight, and you refuse to do yours. What? That's how desperate they were. You got to be really, really desperate to be in that kind of place. They had no food. Elisha the prophet might be responsible for this. Let's find out. That's all the busy work of the king. Outside at the gate, 4 lepers, they don't know anything about that story. They don't know anything about Elisha the prophet. 4 lepers, all they know is they're not welcome inside, they're not welcome outside. Assyrians don't want them. Samaritans don't want them. They don't know. They belong nowhere. They're rejects of society. And here's 4 men sitting out there starving to death because people in there are starving and they don't get scraps anymore. So they've been out here for days with no food. And finally, in their hour of desperation, one of them says, what if we just go turn ourselves into the Syrians? What's the worst thing they can do? Kill us? We're going to die anyway. There's a slim possibility, however, they may take us captive. If they take us captive, they'll have to feed us. There's a slim possibility that we can get fed if we just go turn ourselves in. Worst thing they can do is kill us. Are you kind of following the idea here? In their desperation, they didn't have any great ideas, but they did have an idea. And that's all it took was an idea. We might get fed if we go surrender. And if we don't, they'll kill us. But we're gonna die anyway. So they got up. They could never have imagined what they found. They got up. They decided to go do it. And so they rose in the twilight to go. And what screen's up there? They rose in the twilight to go. And when they got there, the first outcropping of tents were empty. Horses were still tied up outside the tent. They went in, food in there. They couldn't believe it. They said, well, let's eat. And these starving 4 lepers started just eating. This is crazy. Look, there's a gold vessel, and there's gold over there. Nobody ever believed this. Let's get that out and hide it, because who knows what's going to happen. And they went out of that tent, ran somewhere, dug them a little hole, hid all that stuff. Came back down, went to the next tent, empty. They gorged themselves again, hid some more jewels and gold and stuff. They could not know. The Bible tells us a story they didn't know. The story was God had made the Syrian army hear an army coming toward them. He made them hear horses, chariots, roaring down from the hills toward them. So they panicked and they jumped up and ran because they thought 4 other armies or so might have joined with the Samaritans somehow. They got a spy out. So they just fled and they left everything there. Talk about a victory. Now back up in the village, the prophet had been confronted, and the prophet said, okay, by this time tomorrow, y'all have been willing to buy dove's dung for 50 cents. You'll have something to eat, dove's dung. That's what the Bible says. And if y'all kill a mule and you sell his head for $500, 20 years worth of wages, but tomorrow you'll be able to buy this for a penny and a pound of wheat for nothing. And one of the guards said, what's God going to do, open the heavens? They could not imagine that all God was waiting for was somebody to get up and go check out the camp. And 4 leprous men went down to check it out and had their fill, and then felt guilty and said, we should go back and tell everybody that the camp's empty. And when they went back up and told them, even then they said, no, this is a trick. But sooner or later, everybody went out. Well, a few guards went down to spy it out and then brought back the good word. And sure enough, the next day, they had such an abundance from the surrounding army that had cut them off that the very next day they had all the wheat and barley they could eat, and every family got fed, and every family got food, and everybody got to stock up because 4 desperate men decided to just get up and go see what happened because they were going to die anyway. Are you here? Are you hearing me today? I know it's not much of a statement. I know God had already planned it. God had the Syrians ready to go. I know it was all God's design. But I'm just going to ask you a question before you go home. What if the lepers hadn't gotten up? What if they had not decided to act, to just get up and do something? Would the story have read differently? Would everybody in the town have just laid down and famished from drought and famine? I'm going to ask you the same thing about yours. This is the pattern of most success stories. You have to get desperate for a change first. If you're desperate for a change, can anybody inspire you to just get up and do something? And if they can, it's what I'm hoping to do today, is just tell you, don't ever quit believing that God has an answer through every ordeal you ever go through. It is the repetitive pattern of the Bible. You will always have desperate moments in your life, but you will never be there permanently unless you just choose to lay down at the gate and die and not get up and do something. Every time you decide to get up and do something, you're going to find out God will bring you a victory in your life. The sea of glass is only mingled with fire. It's not half of it's fire and half of it's smooth. It's just here and there. There's a rough spot, but it's just a rough spot. You're meant to get through. You are meant. Jesus didn't say it meaninglessly when he said, I am come that you might have life and have it more abundantly. That didn't mean never have a problem. That means every problem has a purpose. You got to believe it. You got to see it. When you get in the middle of the problem, just believe that it's temporary. There's a purpose. You're going to get out of it. You're going to get better. You're going to rise. You're going to sail. You're going to be crowned with victory and success. I can tell you, standing up here today is probably the worst story of failures in this whole room. I have told a number of people my life story is just a series of failures. I failed at that, and I failed at that, and I failed at that, and I failed at that. I failed. And then I will finish by telling you my life story is a series of successes. Because when I failed that first one, I succeeded eventually. And then I failed again, and then I succeeded after that. And then I failed again, and I succeeded after that. That is the truth. I have no idea. I wake up every morning glad I'm on the right side of the grass, having no clue what the day will bring. Doesn't matter anymore. Not because I'm willing to lay down at the gate and die. It doesn't matter anymore because I'm never going to quit stepping out by faith and trying to see what's on the other side of today's fiery spot. I have been through enough fiery spots that I know there's smooth sailing on the other side. I don't know how long it'll take me to get there, but I'm going to get there. I'm going to be inspired to believe that God has one simple thing planned. You know my motto. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I literally live believing goodness and mercy will follow me. Oh, I'm going to hit fiery spots. Do you believe that today? Stand, please. I just want you to leave here today knowing if you're in a rough spot right now, step out by faith and believe that God's got a victory for you somewhere shortly. If you're not in a rough spot today, just hang on to this, plug away the 4 Ations, plug it away in your mind, and just next time you encounter that rough spot, remind yourself, this is temporary. This too shall pass. There's a purpose and a reason for it here, but it's not going to last forever. I'm looking for the smooth sailing on the other side of the fire. I'm going into the enemy's camp and taking what God has left me there. Live with positive faith that everything that's bad is meant for good. Somebody say all things. You're quoting a verse now. Somebody say all things work together for good to them that love God and are called according to his purpose. All things in your life have a good purpose. Every bad thing in your life has a good purpose because you love God and he's called you to his purpose. Bow your heads for a moment. Father, thank you for the promises we stand on. We stand on the promise of your word. You promise good things for those who believe in you and trust in you. It did not mean that we wouldn't struggle and suffer in life just as the apostle did. But it means that everything that happens to us happens because you have greater plans for us after we get through that. After we get through that. Today, I sing your praises. Goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. I have seen it in the past. I cannot see it in the future, but I will believe in the future that the same God who rescued me in the past in my desperate moments will always continue to rescue me in the future. We thank you for your promises. And somebody say, I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. Will you give the Lord a hand of praise, please, and thank him for his word. Father, we do thank you today. Pull us out of our fire and into your victory in Jesus' name.